Well, so how do you explain, and I suspect you've started to explain it already, but I'm not sure I see it entirely. How do you explain, let's call it, you use this term, elite,
Hmm.
elite media, elite bureaucracy,
Hmm.
what some people call the deep state or the administrative state, these sort
Hmm.
of huge bureaucracies that have been developed both in the US and around the world that hold a lot of power, politicians, and, a lot of this kind of functioning in a kind of lockstep to create this perception that actually there's only one way to view this, and if you don't view it this way, there's
Hmm.
something probably wrong with you, right? Which is
Hmm.
where you started out, I think, right?
Hmm.
Yeah.
Um, yes, I see that a little bit as the outcome of a longer standing process, if you like, right? That, I mean, the media has become more and more connected over the world, not just the last 2 years, but that's been true for the last 30 years. And so the stories that we surround ourselves have become more and more similar entertainment as well. And within that kind of environment, the politicians start to sing from the same hymn sheet, right? And so they start to have very similar opinions. And so within that kind of environment, if a huge shock comes that, it sort of has an emotional contagion to it, the panic and the fear that spread via social media first, and then in mainstream media channels, first in China, then East Asia, then Europe, then the US, then Latin America, then it sort of, all the politicians fell in line because they thought, or at least I think, that they thought that if they didn't, they'd be pushed aside. And so, out of sheer survival mode, they sort of saw the stampeding herd and thought, well, I'm the leader now. If I don't go along with this herd, I won't be the leader next. So I'm going to go along with this, right? I'm going to be the herd leader, right? And once you do that, once you sort of start stampeding as well, these are opportunistic politicians. They start looking around. Who can I give the favorable contracts? People come to them. Shouldn't we test everybody via my company, right? Shouldn't we give everybody vaccines via my company and their kids via my company, and masks and all the rest of it, right? So you're then in a new environment where lots of things are changing, and I don't know if you're a fan of Game of Thrones, but as Littlefinger said, chaos is a ladder. And we've definitely seen chaos being a ladder, right? All these little opportunities to make more money and to grab more power. And so we've seen that kind of free for all, right? Whereby there's been lots and lots of opportunity grabbing by thousands of people all over the world. And so it's kind of that, right? So in the stampeding herds, those that were the smart, savvy, politically oriented operators have sort of outfoxed the rest of us.
And then, the people who are, hey, wait a second, yourself, some others, Great Barrington folks, there's a huge cost potentially to taking that position, especially publicly, right?
Yes, I think for myself, I haven't sort of had much negative reactions on this, but I've not been as much in the limelight as, of course, the free leaders of the Great Barrington Declaration, who've, suffered a lot personally. And of course, my co-author Gigi Foster, who sort of was really out there in Australia and sort of been hounded for a while. But I know and support many people in many countries which have sort of been really at the spear point of this, particularly in the media. And by God, has their life been tough, right? And up and down the Western world, lots of doctors got fired for speaking out or for giving their patients sensible information about the risks and benefits of both early treatments and of the vaccines. That was suddenly considered misinformation, whereas up until 2020, that was the legal duty of every doctor to do, right? And now it's become implicitly mandated to lie and break the law. Um, and so, yeah, no, I very much sympathize with all the people who sort of dared to speak out and have suffered for it. And that's happened to many of my friends, and still, to a large degree, continues to be the case now. But I do sense the tide is turning, at least in the US.
We live in an era of censorship and disinformation, and it can be really hard to know what's true and what's false in this information climate. To get honest information and insights you can trust, join us on Epoch TV. You can sign up for your 14-day free trial at ept.ms/free trial Jan. That's ept.ms/free trial JAN. Well, the thing is that, for example, right, traditionally, this doctor-patient relationship was sacrosanct, right? There would be some guidance from a body like the CDC or the FDA, depending on what type of issue, right? But the doctor was responsible, right? And it was very clear, and it wasn't expected to follow some sort of overarching guidance that is the same for every patient, because not every patient is the same. These things are obvious. However, suddenly they became unobvious in these large institutions, and this is what makes everyone suspicious, doesn't it? Right? Are suddenly dictating all sorts of stuff, right? Whether they be in the academia, whether they be, in government, whether they be in these, multilateral institutions. All sorts of places. It's that this concentration of power seems to have, I don't know, is shifted, or this is the logical conclusion of this process that you've been watching. You tell me, right?
I think more the latter, right? So there's definitely been a power grab of the CDC, obviously, famously. But if you look at what's happened in the last 20 years, it's already the case that doctors more and more had to deal, for instance, with hospital administrators. They were tapped on the shoulders by ethics boards. They were sent memos by ministries and the DCD and the National Health Institute. And so more and more they were living in an environment in which they were supposed to do lots and lots and lots of stuff, right? And a huge amount of regulation. And that's even worse, of course, in countries outside of the US. And so they had already been reduced to puppets to a certain degree, right? As I was talking with Charney in the car, a medic will now sort of be kind of a lackey for the first 15 years of their sort of professional existence. 3 years of just doing exams, sort of doing as you're told, being a good boy and a good girl, and then you go into residency for another 3 years and an apprenticeship system, and then you sort of start out in a junior practice, and you're basically close to your 40s before you're actually starting to, be truly supposed to be responsible, right? So after being such a follower and so, as it were, treated like a minion who should just follow orders, well, it's not so strange to think you'll just keep doing that, right? So in a way, this kind of creeping bureaucratization, top down, let's mandate every aspect, that's been creeping in for the last 20, 30 years, right? And not just in the US, this is true throughout the Western world, right? That, bureaucracies, including in private companies, have just been growing, right? More and more centralization. So this is not just true of government, this is also true of large corporations. The number of memos that the CEO will send round as to the corporate social responsibility or the latest ethical thing that they've done or the mission statement has grown just exponentially, right? And so, well, as we say in our book, we now wade through a molasses of bullshit every day, right? I mean, how many forms did you fill out this morning, right? That kind of thing, Do you even know what you consented to when you downloaded an app, right? You couldn't possibly know, because that would have required a whole week to just read it, right? So that sort of thing, right? We now go along with it because it's become too complicated. It's just easier to comply.
It's a kind of a legalistic society that's emerged, I guess. And there's this, incredibly litigious society in America and safety. I learned the term, I think, safetyist in the last however many years, where, let's just play the safe. Let's just play it safe, because who knows what will happen? Who knows who will sue us? Who knows what kind of trouble we could have? And this is at least, we can be safe. But you argue that this kind of inordinate focus on safety actually can create, huge harms.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. And the Achilles heel of safetyism has always been that it's never been about the proportionality of the risks and the benefits, right? Safetyism has always been about a threat that's visible now. And I have to be seen to do something about it. But there are two questions there. Do you actually do something about it? And what harm are you doing whilst you're doing something about it, right? And the doctor's oath, the Hippocratic oath, is do no harm. And so safetyism in that sense is just illegal, right? I mean, if you don't ask the question, what harm am I doing? You are violating your oath, right? And this proportionality principle is also in the Nuremberg Code after the Second World War, because the German Nazis, of course, also abused public health laws and said, everything is for the health of the population. We're going to excise the unhealthy element.